How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great dialogue, great request, actually. Tips or, I guess, tips or advice on when you're getting ready to make sergeant, transitioning into your first supervisory role. Now, granted, guys, yes, we're going to be talking about sergeants, but I believe for anyone who watches this video that's looking to promote up to that first level where you supervise the people that are doing the job, the dialogue we're going to have today, the tips that we're going to have could apply to even those that are not seeking to be a sergeant, but rather another avenue in their career in which they are a first-rank supervisor. That's the key. First level supervisor. Before I bring on my guest, Joe Pomponio, who is a retired lieutenant, so he is more than able to discuss some really good tips on what it's like when you get ready to transition to be a sergeant. And then later on, we'll have him on again because we're going to discuss what it's like to transition into a lieutenant. What are the differences here? And I think before we go into the 5 tips, we may discuss some of the differences that you need to be aware of when you're jumping from that frontline professional to that first level supervisor. And again, that also comes in some of the tips too, by the way. But I just want to make sure people know that there are some extreme differences between these two roles. And by the way, guys, when you become that first line supervisor, to me, that was the biggest jump I made in my career because that's the first time I was in charge of the people doing the job. So definitely something where learning what to do, how to transition, I believe will definitely be very helpful. Real quick, guys, Inmate Manipulations on the market. If you guys get a chance, please check out this book. This book is available on Amazon, Target, wherever you feel you want to buy it. Link to that is in the description. This book is used for training all across the country, And the show is also sponsored by American Military University. Let's get a little bigger for them. American Military University. If you guys are looking for a degree, seek higher education, please check out American Military University. They're very supportive of what we do in corrections, very supportive of what we do here on Tier Talk, and they're developing programs for our correctional professionals. And guys, there it is again. Woo! How to succeed in corrections. Woo! Look at all that. Show them the journal pages. Sorry about that. Didn't plan that out. But look at all the knowledge written in this book. Not just from me, but from other professionals in the field. This book is available now at blue360media.com. The link to that is in the description. You get this book for $39.95, and you get a free ebook. And also, there's a book, same book, but it's on the app as well. So it's pretty impressive. And guys, the book, I just want to say thank you because the book is selling very well. I actually got a chance to walk into my job the other day and I saw people holding it. That's without me promoting it. They just saw, I don't know, just know me and knew I was doing a book somehow. And I walked in and they were holding it. It's pretty cool, guys. You know, this is the journal. This is the feel that I wanted from this book. I wanted something that people can carry around with them. And when they're dealing with a concern, they can just kind of find something here that hits what they're looking for, or at least gives them the right direction. And then I'm working on my rookie book. So I'm going to try to, and I want to get it out there now. When I write my rookie book, I'm going to have 50 tips, but I'm going to try not to reiterate any of the tips that have been in this book or this book. So when you get the rookie book, when it comes out sometime next year, they're going to be fresh tips or a different perspective to some of the tips I'll be providing, but you're still going to have to have these other books because they're going to complement, because these books have a lot more with inmate interactions and whatnot. I don't know if I'm going to revisit that with the rookie book. We'll see as we progress. All right, let me get Joe. What's up, Joe?
What's up, brother? Look what the UPS man brought me today, man.
Let's zoom in on that.
Look at that sexy book right there.
How does that feel, Joe?
Man, it feels good. It's got a good feel to it. It fits in the palm well. It reads well. The font's awesome. Man, the way it's set up, and I can't thank you enough for letting me be a part of this, man. This is awesome, dude. Very awesome.
Well, you're going to be a part of the next book with the rookies, and also this time around, Joe is going to donate a whole passage to the rookies, and he's also going to, maybe someone that he connects to from the professional is going to put that quote at the beginning, and I can't wait to see what that passage is going to be. I just love, being able to give people the opportunity to submit their thoughts and if I have the chance to get it out to the world, let's get it out there to the world. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's why even this book here, 159 passages. Each one has a quote from different people in the profession. I mean, to
Yeah.
elevate your voice, it's an honor. It is.
It's a great collaboration from everybody all over the world, man. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I actually signed 2 books today. So, James Zafridis, if you're watching this, book's coming your way. And Vanessa from Canada, the book's coming your way. I signed it. Forgive my handwriting; it's not the best, but I'm sending it out through the postal service tomorrow morning. So if you guys watch this, here's a test. If you guys watch it, comment and say on the YouTube channel, comment and say Gangi got you excited to see the book. So again, Vanessa and James, the book, it will be in the mail by tomorrow. Hey, Joe, let me ask you a question, Joe. So you went from officer to sergeant to lieutenant. I know you're in a different position now, but we'll stay with your first career if you don't mind. But I want to have you on later on, maybe sometime later in the week, talk about that transition to lieutenant, because I know it's a lot different than being that sergeant, because now you're a level up, a little higher. But let's talk about, some of the main differences before we go into our tips when you're making sergeant. Like, so for me, when I made sergeant, the big thing is now I am going to be in charge of the people that do the job. Now, without crossing any of the tips, but real quick, do you think that is a big jump for someone in their career going from a frontline professional to now being the supervisor of these frontline professionals?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've always said, transitioning to sergeant is probably going to be the most important promotion within your career. You go from front line to you got the weight of the correctional world on your shoulders now. So yeah, definitely transitioning to sergeant is probably one of the most difficult and most important steps in a promotional ladder.
Yeah, I know this I don't know if a lot of people may agree with it, but I'm going to stand tall because from my experience, I'm going to say when you start crossing into the supervisory role and the management role, I would like to think that the sergeant is probably one of the harder working positions. Would you agree to that, Joe?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Being a sergeant, you still have the go getter attitude. And for some reason, and it's internal, everybody has it. Everybody has that need to kind of not really promote yourself but show yourself. So yeah.
Yeah, and you're going to be on the scene. You're definitely going to be. You got to be approachable. I mean, you're also the first line outside of the officers or outside of the front line, whatever it is, how you want to do it, for the inmates to go to.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that. So if there's a concern with an officer, the inmates should be going through the next level up, not directly to lieutenant and not directly to admin. They should be going through that level of command. And I also like to think, for me, even as admin, when I look, at my people run the facility, the ones that are actually in that facility, if I need to find out stuff about my officers, besides being able to talk to most of my officers, of course, but if I'm looking to find out stuff more collectively, I do go to my lieutenants, but I also make time to go to my sergeants because I feel that they are more informed collectively, because I also believe like maybe a lieutenant is filtered up from the sergeant, but the sergeant is probably hearing it directly from the people that have concerns, and then they try to find a way to deal with some concerns, but whatever they can't, to start forwarding up the chain. But do you think the sergeants definitely have a little bit more of an interaction with the front line?
Oh yeah, definitely. That they have more interaction not only with the front line but with the offender population as well. As a lieutenant, uh, chain of command was important to me. Especially when problems arise. I would, me as a lieutenant, before I went down there, I would send my sergeants down there, whether they were new or whether they're old hands. I would send my sergeants down there first because I want them to start getting into those situations and getting a feel for it, making a decision and running with it, right or wrong. I got your back, but I want you to gain that experience. Because once you step up to sergeant, you're not just dealing with the offender population now. You're a disciplinarian, you're a chaplain, a guidance counselor, or the face of many hats, and that, not just for the offender population, but also for employees.
Yeah, and by the way, the gaining of experience is definitely going to help you as you move up to make those decisions. I believe, when I was a superintendent, I worked at a very busy facility. Then when I went up to associate administrator, I went to a busier facility, but with just more authority. And because of all the work I did at the level before, it made me more able to do what was expected of me in that higher position. So again, if you're an officer, or whatever, that frontline professional, gain that experience as much as you can, go for the, welcome challenges, seek opportunities, because if you're career driven and you're getting ready to become that supervisor, I'm not saying you have to know everything, and we'll get to that, but I will say the more knowledge you bring in, if possible, will definitely help aid you in the right direction. Because the key is when you start becoming a supervisor, I think, and we'll get to, actually might as well do the first one now. You don't need to know everything, going willing to learn. For me, when I became a sergeant, I knew there was going to be a lot for me to learn, because I wind up going from a female facility to a maximum security male facility. I never worked with men before. I had worked with women at that time for 8 or 9 years. And then I was sent over to a maximum security for men. And when I got in there, I knew I didn't have experience like they did. I mean, yeah, I had experience at communication, which is a great skill. Trust and believe, especially when you move up, you want people that communicate, because there's always liability at the back end of the use of force. But with that said, it was hard for people to kind of trust me, because I didn't have experience like most of them did at working at that male facility. So what I did was, I showed them I cared by being a voice for them, but I also asked a lot of questions with genuinely sincere curiosity. I mean, I wanted to know, how do they do their job? Is there any way I can help them be effective? And then eventually, the great thing about it was I entered the position and kind of learned as I went. I remember, I want to share one more story, Joe. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. I was in Nebraska, and we were doing a panel discussion, and I'll be doing more conferences next year, guys. So if you're interested in those conferences, let me know now, because they get booked, but I'm going to be doing more, especially because with the book. So let me know, email me. Maybe I'll have Joe come down. We'll do some panel discussions, but I already have one coming up that I have to do next year. But I was there, and, I do my keynote, and there was a gentleman that said that he was nervous because their facilities are understaffed and they're promoting people a lot sooner. And he only had 2 years in, but nobody was stepping up. And management wind up saying, hey, will this, can we get this new boot? He's got initiative. Can we get him to step up? And of course, he thinks, man, 2 years, I don't have enough time. This is crazy. And I used to think, what really signifies enough time? Because you can have people that do 20 years and never do a damn thing, and then people that do 2 years and just intentional with their career, and they evaluate every experience they go through. But with that said, I told the person, I said, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? And I said, listen, when you enter as a supervisor, I want you to know something. You don't need to know everything. Go in willing to learn. You're putting too much pressure on yourself, thinking that once you become a supervisor, you got to know everything. I said, for me, when I transitioned from one facility to the next, I didn't know nothing. But when I became a supervisor, I had a good foundation. Don't get me wrong, but I learned everything from the people that I was supervising. But the first thing I would tell you right now, I gave the person the advice, was you got to do whatever you can right now, not to impress them, not thinking that you have to know everything and try to impress them. That's done at a distance. No, you don't want to do that. You want to go in and make an impact. So when you go in, you fight for their needs, you speak for them, and you'll earn their respect. Trust and believe. You will earn their respect. And that also traveled with me, and even as administration, because I oversee departments that I've never had experience in. But Joe, what's your thoughts on, people? There are some people that believe you have to go in as a supervisor and you have to know everything because they're totally about giving out direction. But I was always taught, enter humble and kind of serve your people in those leadership positions.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to go in there, driving full force right off the bat, and stepping up to sergeant. Pretty much everybody is aware that sergeant's an entry level supervisory step. You're not going to know everything. They don't require you to know everything. They want to know if you know the basics. They want to know if you're going to work well under pressure. They want to know if you're going to make a decision, when it gets down to the nut cutting. So, and like you said, don't put too much pressure on yourself thinking that you have to go in and know everything, because hell, when I promoted to sergeant, hell, I didn't know it all either. All of a sudden now instead of just dealing with offenders, we're dealing with human resources. We're dealing with risk management. We're dealing with this. We're dealing with that. And they understand. They don't expect you to know it all off the bat. That's where the willingness to learn comes from, initiative. And I had sergeants that worked for me that, if they didn't know, they didn't necessarily, some of them didn't necessarily come to me. They went to that individual department and asked, their department heads, like HR or whatever. And when they come back to me, they would say, well, so-and-so, was asking questions regarding human resources. And, I went to HR and asked them, and this is what we're going to do. Perfect. Because to me, that shows me that you have the initiative to learn. You have the willingness to open yourself up to more knowledge. And that's all, that's really all that we ask. Don't go in there putting pressure on yourself thinking you got to know it all off the bat, because I promise you will not.
Yeah, and Joe, you're so spot on, because guys, even when you enter in the field of corrections, or even as you move up into the different positions, I believe you're brought in for your potential to learn and grow, and not always so much of what you know already, even though it does matter, it does. But then they could also shift you to a whole nother facility. I mean, I know jails are different, but if you're working out of prison, they could just say, hey, you're going to make rank over here, and the whole world changes. I mean, literally, yeah, I'm a supervisor, but I've never worked here before. And I'm definitely going to a facility that the people are more familiar with the dynamics here. And now I got to lead them. So you have no choice but to enter. Yeah, I mean, again, you have some level of understanding of the job in general, but you got to know how the job applies to that, let's say, that new facility, or, how does that apply to your higher position? So again, going in humble, to me, is the best way to do it, because I think there's a lot of people that really do put a lot of unrealistic expectations on themselves when they become that supervisory role. And the problem is when they put those unrealistic expectations on themselves, and Joe, I got to get your thoughts on this, they may, in their effort to impress, which we just talked about, become a little aggressive with their authority, or won't admit when they don't know something, and they start turning into a dictator. Because then when you go to ask why, they may think it's a challenge to their position. I think that if you go in, because again, if I go in thinking that I have to know everything, and I know I don't, but I don't want to come off that way, I may start becoming insecure. And then the people that are going to want to help me, I look at them as challenging me. So I think the humbleness, that is the best. That's probably the best advice out of all the tips we're going to give you, is go in willing to learn, and then go ahead and show your front line that you care, so they're willing to teach you. But Joe, before we get to the second tip, do you agree that for some people, that when they feel they have to know everything and they go in with that mindset, they could wind up over overemphasizing or overwhelming others with this facade of this need to have authority, or this need to be this dictator, because they don't want to be challenged, or they
Yeah.
look at being challenged?
Yeah, I mean, when you go into it, the basic principle is everybody knows that you have rank on your shoulder. The rank on your shoulder doesn't make you; you make the rank on your shoulder. So, big difference between self-confidence and arrogance. Don't go in there with arrogance, because it'll eat you up every time, and so will your folks. Be humble. Don't use the rank on your collar or the rank on your sleeve to dictate how you do your job. Everybody knows you're a supervisor. Everybody respects that position. Now they're looking at you to lead them, not dictate to them.
Yeah, I like that. And now, you know what? I don't know if there's really a priority. I mean, like an order to this list, but because we're kind of heading in that direction, we keep on saying about care and voicing up. Well, let's get to this tip here. Be a voice of your people and learn how to communicate to the upper echelon. So this to me is probably one of the biggest roles that you're going to have as that frontline supervisor, because you are immediately connected to your people. So if you don't know what the concerns are to your people, let's say the concerns that are affecting your people, let's say the lieutenant goes up to you, hey, what's up with ABCD? You better go out there and find out, because you are the direct line between your front line and the next level up, which starts to cross into the administrative side. Because I would also start considering lieutenants the administrative end of corrections, lieutenants and up. So having said that, you got to play that role, but you also have to know how to communicate with the upper echelon. So and vice versa too. I always talk like there's this way of translating the tactical to the strategy and the strategy to the tactical. So, you got and in the middle is operations somewhere, but tactical is from the front line. Strategy is usually from the higher up. And then you kind of, as that frontline supervisor, you're kind of right in the middle of strategy to operation. Tactical to operations and strategy, and then vice versa. You're right in the middle of the translating that dialogue. So you have to understand how to speak the language of, your frontline professionals, but then you may have to translate a little bit when you speak up to the higher level management, and vice versa. If management may come down with demands, and then you yourself, when you get it, you have to find a way to motivate your people to do their job and understand what that job is for. So I think there's a big part when it comes to frontline supervisors and keeping the morale to get the job done. You are definitely the person that is responsible for keeping the front line motivated. I think so. What's your thoughts on that, Joe?
Yeah, I've always considered consider that to be what was a phrase I used back in the day. It was called "voice it up and sell it down." The biggest thing is now you're an advocate for your people, for their needs, what they things that you can voice your concerns upward for things that your people might need to effectively do their jobs, whether it be tools, whether it be implements, whether it be policies, a difference. One of the tough things in becoming a newly promoted supervisor is when you start voicing concerns and needs of your people upward. Sometimes it's not always well received by the upper echelon, and sometimes there's some headbutting going on. I'm not saying be confrontational about it, but learn how to tolerate not so much indifference but different opinions, because there's going to be different ways and to do the same task. Is just finding that common ground. But now that you're a sergeant, you've got to learn to be an advocate for your people, because your people want to know that their concerns matter to you, and they want to know that you actually are attentively listening to their not so much wants and needs, but their concerns, and voicing them upward. On the flip side of that, you're going to get policies that are handed down to you. You're going to get orders that are handed down to you. You may not like it. You may not work in your book, and it is what it is. But you got to be that car salesman at that point. You got to learn how to sell it to your people. And make sure they understand why. Just don't go in there and say, Warden Gangi said this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. Go in there and sell it to them. Say, I brought the concerns up. We talked about it, and this is what we're going to do, and this is why we're going to do it.
Yeah, and Joe, you're spot on, because I want to mention something for the people that are getting ready to cross into that supervisory role, and we are pushing that voice up. I want you guys to be mindful that as a frontline supervisor, it's very easy to, it should be easy to have that approach to your frontline people. I mean, that's your job. I mean, that's pretty much what you have to do. But it really does become intentional effort to be that voice up. That's not something that is passive. That's something where, you have to make the effort when the time comes, because it's just not automatic. I mean, it's funny, because I've told people in the past that, as management, it's easy to go ahead and delegate down. But then when I have to talk up, I have to kind of just, make more effort, be more intentional with my efforts. But I want people to know it's worth it. So, don't let that feeling being nervous, whatever it is. You have to do what you got to do for your frontline people, and people that are in management should respect that, because you are the one that are right next to them. So you are truly the first person that's going to be affected by their morale. So if I'm management and I got a sergeant that's coming up with a bunch of concerns, I'm going to listen to that sergeant because he's directly next to those people. And I have to find a way to work with that sergeant, him or her, to make sure he doesn't have to go back to an environment where he feels powerless or she feels powerless. And I want to touch on that, Joe, real quick, because that's a thought we didn't think of. But, as management, your sergeant probably is the one that will be next affected by the morale of the front line, however positive or however negative. But also, it can also add something else on the adverse of that. They could also directly influence that morale, however positive or negative. So the connection goes both ways. The sergeant can be influenced by or can influence to. But as a supervisor, Joe, you have to be wary of that. Correct, both ways.
Oh yeah, absolutely. To me, being a sergeant was one of the most influential. And to me, even still to this day, I think being a sergeant is more influential than being a lieutenant. To me, being a lieutenant, I was just the final line of authority for that shift. I signed all the approval paperwork, whatever we needed to do. But I considered my sergeants pretty much the heartbeat of the shift, because they're the ones, when I was, dealing with useless force or whatever, and couldn't walk all the posts, my sergeants were they were my face. They were my communicators. They were, I don't want to say my political folks, but, they were the faces on my poster when I couldn't be there. So, being a sergeant is definitely, to me, being more influential than being a lieutenant, because the sergeants are that frontline communicator up and down.
Yeah, and I want to mention something. I really agree. This could be another topic one day, but there's something here as we're talking about this, because we didn't prepare for this, but I want to explore something real quick. Because again, guys, I mean, this is the discussion you're not going to get elsewhere. That's why we kind of just let the dialogue goes where it goes. But you're right. The sergeant's got that direct influence definitely going down, and definitely going up to that lieutenant. But then when we get to the lieutenant discussion next time, I think their greater influence starts to go up. That's why for a lieutenant, they need those seats at the table. You know what I mean? And we're going to definitely get that. But I wanted to remember that. That's a good. That we can have a whole topic on that of influence. But definitely, as for a sergeant, not only will you be influenced by your front line, but you will be also the one that could be influencing them. So sometimes, if your front line, the morale is dropped, first look at yourself first. See if there's anything you can do, and then work with management. And if you're management and you got a sergeant coming up to you trying to talk to you, hopefully with the lieutenant by their side, everybody's on the same page. Just remember, work with those supervisors that are overseeing those frontline professionals, because they're the ones that have to go back and deal face to face with the stuff that you're pushing out. It's a lot easy to push stuff out, when you're up at top. But then you got those sergeants and those, lieutenants, but more so the sergeants have to meet with those individuals face to face and make sure the message is clear. And you got to be able to give them all the tools to not just be effective in carrying out that message, but to make sure it's done in a manner that keeps the morale where it needs to be. Even if at one point you coming down, standing next to your supervisor and explaining the why behind the work that has to be done. If the sergeant's like, hey, listen, this is not really translating well. Can I have some help? Not a problem. Let me get out of this desk. Let's go right down. Let's see how I can help you, and we'll do this thing together. And that matters a lot, I think. And it's funny, just to say something, it's good when we're all together like that, communicating something, so we're all on that same page of understanding. It's good to see administration supporting their supervisor in an effort to support their staff. It's just, I don't know, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing that we should do more often. If I see that I have a sergeant that's scrambling and, trying to keep the morale, hey, how can I help you? Joe, you want me to go down? Let's go down. We'll shoot the shit together, bring some of the officers that have some influence, and let's have a chat with them, and let's explain what we have going on, and let's see how we can work this thing out. Maybe there's something I'm missing. Okay, that was, hey, Joe, that was a good one. That's like a bonus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. I'm going to have you go first on this one, Joe, because this was your thought, and I really like this one. So have fun with this. Respect is a two-way street. Learn to need your folks as much as they need you. Don't be positional.
Yeah, absolutely. When you go into the job, we've already discussed the fact that you're not going to know everything. And depending on how much time you come in the system, you may be promoted to sergeant within 3 years of starting your employment there. The one thing to keep in mind is that you have correctional officers on your shift that probably have 20 and 25 years who chose not to promote. However, they probably know the job. They've probably seen the situations. With that being said, learn to need your folks as much as they need you for the guidance. You're the one that's ultimately gonna to lead them and direct them. But, also lean on your staff. Some of your correctional officers are probably your best support system. Because a shift without officers isn't a shift. And the correctional officer, you need them you need all of those correctional officers a hell of a lot more than they need the supervision, because, you can run a penitentiary without the supervision, but you can't run a penitentiary without the correctional officers. So, when you go into the job, do so with an open mind and understand the fact that you're not going to know everything, and understand the fact that some of your officers may have that answer. And it doesn't take away from you being a leader to take advice or to take knowledge from a correctional officer who's probably been in that position at some point in time or in that situation. It doesn't detract from you being a supervisor. Even as a lieutenant, I've taken advice from sergeants who've been sergeants for 20 years. It doesn't take away from me being a lieutenant. That just opens myself up to take the knowledge from below me, not just above me. So learn to lean on your folks as much as they lean on you.
I like that, Joe. I just want to mention something, guys. Kind of goes into the first tip we gave. This is a family. And when it comes to needing each other, I mean, it really is supporting people to where they got to be to reach their greatest potential, wherever they feel that is. I mean, potential doesn't always have to mean they have to make rank. We just got to do what we can to support people to be the most effective at their job. So having said that, as a supervisor, it's great to know that, my people have my back. I mean, to me, that's number one. I mean, and how do I do that, or how do I know they got my back? Is really I try my best to have theirs and hope it's reciprocated. But I truly do. I mean, I love everyone. I just kind of choose who's worthy of my time, as John Maxwell will say. I go in, and I'm not naive, guys, but hear me out, because I'm not naive. But for me, I've learned as I moved up that if people are in the position, I will trust them first, and they can earn my distrust. And we'll get to something towards that later on when it comes to micromanaging. But I have to give people my trust, because as you start to move up, your area of control becomes bigger, and you just can't question what everybody does. You just got to sometimes sit back and let the facility do what it's got to do, let the people do what they got to do. But there's a story I have in this book, the most recent book. I'll say his name. Good officer, Hansel Cordova, very good friend of mine. I never said his name before. It's not even in the book, but the story's about him. I think I actually did a video on this once. I read the story. Me and him were and are sorry, we don't work at the same prison anymore. But when we see each other, we talk to each other like we never, stop talking. But sometimes when you work at different facilities, time gets away. It just does sometimes. But me and him were very close. I saw him as one of the most professional officers that I could ever work with. I just loved how he dealt with the inmates. I just loved how he was able to keep people around him happy and upbeat. And he did not have an easy career, because there were things that he wanted that he just could not get past that first obstacle. One of them being, securing rank, just could not get past the test. Now, mind you, the thing about the test is that you could just get a percentage of something wrong, and it drops your score dramatically. It just drops your score dramatically. So he's been never been able to really get lucky with the test. I mean, literally just hasn't been able to get lucky with the test. And, we're over 20 years in, 21 years in. So we're getting to that point where, we're probably, or in his case, not going to take any tests anymore because, I'm planning on doing my 25, let's say, and out. Like I'm speaking as if I'm him. So maybe there's one more go around. So the book talks about how when we were first in this profession and we were studying for supervisor together, and we really helped each other, support each other the whole way through. I made rank, he didn't, and there was just no animosity. There was no feelings of guilt. He just basically told me, "Do you? This is your time." And it's funny because everybody else, when they tend to study, the facility is like right before an exam, the facility is like the closest it'll ever be. Knowledge is just being gained. And all of a sudden the results come out and everybody just separates and get jealous over who's getting what position. It's so phony sometimes, but it's not all the time, but just bear with me. But to tell my story, he kept true to ensuring that I was successful, that there was nothing holding me back to reach my greatest potential, even feelings of guilt because I may have made a position that he couldn't. Just an excellent individual. And the end of the story that I write here is that when you move up, first off, when you look back at your career, it has nothing to do with position, it has to do with impacts you've made in the lives of others. Because now that as I go back, believe it or not, having these positions, but knowing I made a contact with Joe today will last me forever. Because now it's literally what I can take with me. I can't take my position when I retire, but I could take a connection I made with Joe with me, or a connection I made with my boy with me. So again, guys, you want to be mindful of that when you get to the positions. It's not about position. It's about making the impact, because that's what matters. That's what's going to give you everlasting influence. Because I have seen people retire and they're out for 20 years and people will still call them lieutenant. And that's not because, they carried the position in an effort to always broadcast their authority. It's because the person recognized Joe as a good leader, and they just can't let go of that respect. Anyway, when I look at my career, I realized that I was really happy, even though that he didn't make it up as he would have. I was happy knowing that I had someone like him on the front line that I could trust, that I knew would do the job, I knew would be effective. And it made me feel more comfortable in my position as a leader because I had a hero like him. And then he would turn around and say, well, you know what, then I was happy that you were up there because I knew you had my back. And, it's just an amazing feeling to know that regardless of where we've been in our careers, whatever journey we took, that it was never about position. Just never was. Because at the end of the day, I'm still Anthony or still Gange, and he's still HC Hansel. So I think it's a good story to share. But what do you think about that, Joe? Those lasting moments, those influences. I know it's a little bit of a sidetrack, but it matters, right? Needing your people needing you. I thought that expressed that.
It does. I'd be telling a lie if I told you that I didn't enjoy the fact that here I am, almost 3 years retired later. I'm still getting phone calls, from some of my sergeants, some of my officers that looking for some moral support, some guidance. A vast majority of them still call me lieutenant, and that's a good feeling as well. Even though I tell them, hey, it's not lieutenant anymore, it's just Joe, and I have one reply that said, "No, sir, it's always going to be lieutenant to me." I'd be a lie if I told you that. That didn't hit me in the feels, because when you're 3 years out and people are still thinking about you, talking about you, your influence, your leadership, things that you've done from them when they hit rock bottom, and you had a helping hand and lifted them up, man. That's when your career left a positive change, not only on the person but the agency.
I agree. And guys, by the way, guys, just as a, well, actually, is it one of the yeah, actually, let's go to the next one because it's going to cross into it. Begin to let go of being hands-on. Again, there was really no order in how we did it, but this is a good tip to learn to delegate and empower. Don't micromanage. Some people, when they get promoted, they may get promoted as a way to recognize their excellence at a certain skill. But having said that, when you get recognized for that excellence and then you start moving up to those next positions, you got to kind of let other people do that job. And sometimes people don't want to let go of that because they want to still be considered the best in that position. And again, I want people to realize something. When you move up, it's really based on potential to grow, and then being able to delegate to people in their efforts so they can become as good as you. I remember, I've done a couple of cell extractions in my time, but not a lot, but a couple. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I know enough. I've done a few. I've also had to oversee, the videos on the back end of them as well. And I'll see some people may say, well, Gangi, when it comes to moving up an admin, you really got to have experience, and they kind of go to the extremes of all these use of forces. And I'm not denying that. Of course, you should have some level of understanding what it is. But to be honest with you, if you go in learning, the people from the front line will help teach you if you don't have that experience. That's one thing. But second thing is, it's their time to shine. It's their time to shine. So having said that, when you're leading those teams, be open to what they feel. Don't get me wrong. You have to have some knowledge. I'm not saying that, but you got to be willing to let go, because it's not about you being the best anymore. Again, recognition for promotion sometimes come in the back end of someone being so successful at something that is a frontline responsibility. And then when they get up to the second level or the first level of frontline supervision, the problem is they don't want to let it go because they still want to be considered the best. This isn't competition. This is your time to pass the torch, because then the problem is when you still have that feeling of wanting to be the best, then you're not really giving out all the information that people may need so they can go ahead and achieve their greatness. And then the other thing about that comes with the fact that if you're doing that all the time, you're going to be micromanaging your people. You're not going to be allowing them to feel empowered, because you're going to be on them, because you're going to want to do the job. Again, you got to let go of that level of hands-on, because it's no longer about recognizing your efforts, but rather recognizing or appreciating the team that you supervise. Joe, this was one of the thoughts that you brought up. What's your thoughts on what was just discussed?
Being newly promoted, it's hard not to be hands-on. I can't think of a single person who likes a micromanager. There's a difference between being hands-on and hands-in. Hands-on, you're basically on top of that employee all the time. Hands-in, you're with the employee, helping them get it done. Being a micromanager never ends well. It's being a micromanager is probably one of the biggest morale killers that there is. And it has negative impacts. Everybody's going to make mistakes, you included. You're going to fall on your ass at some point in your career, and that's fine, because 90% of our experience comes from the failures that we've made, or the mistakes that we made. That's how you overcome, you survive, and you learn from it, and you drive on. And you need to let your people do the same sometimes. I'm not saying stand back and give them carte blanche and just let them go buck wild. I'm saying, I would let them run their duty post as long as it's within policy and procedure and they keep it between the ditch. I let them run it. That's their area of assignment. That's their neighborhood, and there's going to be times where they make mistakes, and that's fine. You're going to make mistakes too. The biggest thing is, how are you going to overcome and learn from it and not do it again? So, you don't have to be a micromanager, because, yes, everybody wants things to go right all the time. But if you go into this job being a micromanager, not only are you going to burn yourself the hell out, you're going to give yourself ulcers, and kind of leans back to the other topic that we discussed. Use your resources, use your people. Give them the task, give them the job, give them the functionality, and let them run with it. If they make a mistake, that's fine. especially if it's a simple mistake. I mean, you pick them up, you dust them off, and you send them back again for round two. Just like, the lieutenants, the captains, the majors are going to do for you. There's going to be a point in your career as a sergeant where you're going to make mistakes, but they're not going to micromanage you and keep a foot on your neck 24/7. They want you to make mistakes because that's how you learn from your experiences, is by making those mistakes. So don't go in there micromanaging the folks, because it's a morale killer. It really is. I never could stand a micromanager, and that was kind of one of the things I had on my mind when I went into, because I had some really good sergeants as a correctional officer. I had some really good lieutenants, and I've had some pretty bad ones. And I remembered the ones that left a more positive influence on me, that I learned the most from. And I also remembered the ones that, I had the most negative influence from. So, go in there and try to promote as much positivity as you can. Nobody's saying turn the reins over and just let them go buck wild. I mean, you got to have some sort of guidance in there at some point, but you don't have to, directly dictate and run their job for them. Let them do that.
Yeah, and guys, listen, I want to touch on something that Joe just said too. Like, we get the what, and then we technically should give it to you guys to figure out the how. And if there's any concerns, we should be able to understand what the why is. I think so. So when you're ahead and you're talking to your people, and you try to increase that, the morale, after you empower them, maybe bring some investment in by giving them the significance behind the task, the why part of it all, because that's something you should know as their supervisor. I believe that when you give people a task, you should be ready to answer the why. And if it's in an emergent situation, then maybe later on when things aren't moving so quickly, be prepared to answer the why. Because again, as a supervisor, I may not know the technicality of every job, but I should know why it needs to be done. Because I need to translate that. I need to make sure that I get buy-in, and I'm not going to get buy-in from my people by just telling them what to do and then treating them like robots. I mean, I think that's one thing that I need to know as a sergeant or as a supervisor is, again, not an effort to circumvent or pass judgment, but more of an effort of curiosity. Why? So then I can go ahead and use that why to go ahead and bring it to my people to emphasize the importance of the job being done. So they feel the work, however tedious it may seem, ultimately has a higher sense of value. And Joe, would you agree with that, Joe? Does that make sense? You think supervisors definitely? I mean, I don't have to know the expert, like the technical side of every job, but I should know why that job needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah, I thought that was a good one. And Joe, take the lead on this one, Joe. Prepare to take responsibility and accountability. Now, when we brought this up, Joe, I think this to me, when you become a first line supervisor, this becomes official when you are now responsible for others. Correct?
Absolutely. Once you take that first step, you're a true leader at that point. You're not only responsible, you're not just responsible for a duty post anymore. Now you're responsible for the entire correctional facility. You're responsible for your people. You're responsible for the offender population. You're responsible for following the building schedule every day, making sure that everything gets done as needed to be. And with responsibility comes accountability. Not everything's always going to go the way you planned it, and you're going to be held accountable. It is what it is. It's again, it's a learning experience. Nobody expects you to go into this job and know everything right off the bat and expect that you're not going to make mistakes. That's just foolish. But when you step into this job, understand that you're going to have to take the good with the bad, and you're going to have to take the bad with the good. You're going to have to learn how to take criticism. You're going to have to learn how to take the constructive criticism that comes with being a sergeant when those mistakes happen, or when failures or lapses happen. It's just a normal. It's just a normal growth for your next step up.
Yeah, and guys, we talked about this in many episodes before. This is not an easy thing to do, and this right here, responsibility and accountability, should be part of your deciding factors when you cross into supervision. Like if I'm getting ready to become a supervisor, one of the questions that I need to ask myself is, am I ready to be responsible for the choices of others? And actually at one point, maybe even be held accountable to the actions of others as a team leader. If you answer no to that, don't even think about becoming a supervisor. That's the one question right there that needs to be a yes. Because if you are not willing to take responsibility or accountability, you will fail as a leader. 100%. You will not get buy-in from your people. You will not get trust from your management. It's just, at the end of the day, you're going to wind up being a boss with just a bunch of freaking excuses of why things can't get done, and all you'll do is push blame on the others. And at the end, management's going to come down to you and say, "Hey, come here for a second. Who leads the team?" Because at the end of the day, you better not be pointing at anybody else when you yourself lead that team. All teams are a reflection of the people that are directly above them at all levels, by the way. But Joe, that's a good question to ask yourself before you become a supervisor.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You got to understand that sometimes you're gonna take an ass chewing, or you're gonna take a written reprimand for the choices that some of your officers have made, and you got to understand that's just going to be that's just part of the supervisory role. And you got to be ready for that. And if you're not willing to take one for the team, um, sometimes mistakes happen just because they're mistakes. But if they're repetitive, it's because of leadership. The shift morale, the shift operations, and the way they run is a direct reflection of the leadership involved. So, and sometimes that comes with ass chewings from above you, below you. For something that the officer may have done that you had no knowledge of, but and that happens. But the main thing is to take accountability for your shift. Be that one to stand in the path and take that accountability. No, that's on me. I failed to tell that officer we needed to do this, and the officer went a different direction because I didn't get the chance to have that discussion with that officer. That's on me. Don't be the first one to go, well, he fucked it up.
Yeah.
His problem. No, it's your problem. You're the supervisor now. And if you're not willing to step into that role and take heat from above for those below you, don't even consider applying.
And you want to know something funny about what you just said, Joe? So I have seen staff, not all the time, but just and to kind of relate to the story, I've seen staff, let's say, make a bad decision, and then maybe there's good intent, but unfortunately a decision was made that really didn't work out the way it was planned. And when the management reviews the incident the next day, and they may bring up the supervisor to kind of question what happened, the supervisor's already in defense mode and already pointing the blame at their people that they lead. And then management really winds up getting frustrated, no longer about the incident, but of the cowardice of the supervisor. Because sometimes we want the supervisor to give us something so we can lean on, so we can alleviate some arguments against a choice. Like, so I'll give you an example. I know we don't work in a perfect world, and I know I'm not going to understand the decisions that people may make unless I talk to them first. I get it. So sometimes I'll call the supervisors up first to see if they have a higher level understanding that I can work with. And then if they don't, kind of gets me upset because it's like, well, they didn't really talk to their officers because they don't really know what happened. Because that's kind of like a test, but eventually I will still talk to the officers. But I kind of want to see what the supervisor knows in regards to why the decision was made. And again, it's an effort for me to listen to what they have to say and then see if there's a way that I can sell the argument as well, because we all have someone we have to answer to, 100%. So I need to be confident in what I'm trying to sell or my efforts to correct a concern. Now, the moment I go to start the dialogue off by saying, "Hey, Joe, do me a favor. What happened yesterday? Oh, let me tell you. Gangi did this and blah, blah, blah did that." And I was like, whoa, stop. Because I wasn't hoping that we'd have to go this route. At the end of the day, now what's going to wind up happening is I'm going to tell the supervisor they got to step out. And then what I'm going to do is I may wind up just having an investigation. because the supervisor here, instead of, trying to understand what's going on, they're quick to point the finger, and now it puts me in a tough spot because I have nowhere to lean credibility. So if someone argues against what happened, I need to be able to be confident in my argument against it. And if I can't be confident, especially if I have my frontline supervisor who's quick to point the blame and not stand on anything solid, I'm going to have a problem selling it. And then it turns out my ass is on the line. So again, we can sell it if we have someone that can give us the strong argument and we could all be in it together. But if you got a weak link in that chain, especially if that weak link is that frontline supervisor, it becomes very hard for administration to sell a concern as if, whatever the intent is, But Joe, that frontline supervisor, if they're a weak link and they do push the blame, you wind up actually having this thing where you wind up having a survival type or cover your ass type, because now that supervisor that's that weak link makes it hesitant for management to have the backing of the team.
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, you can't be your first choice is throwing your employees under the bus tires. If that's your first explanation to those above you, it's a bad deal. I've had employees that made bad choices with good intentions, thinking that they were within policy and guidelines. And, I would kind of try to get ahead of the situation and do sort of a written warning. Therefore, when the next day, and unfortunately it does happen, you have some administrators that first words out of their mouth is write them up. I want a formal disciplinary on them. A formal disciplinary is not your cure all to everything. And I would try to kind of combat that and get ahead of it by doing a written warning. Therefore, if I have my written warning in place, 9 times out of 10, they can't justify doing a formal disciplinary on that because I've already, handled it at an informal level. And you've got to be willing to be that supervisor to stand up for your folks that make, bad decisions with good intentions. Now, there's going to be times where you have no other choice but to do a formal disciplinary, especially if an officer's dirty or what have you. There's some things that are just automatic, and we understand that. But when you have employees that are willing to show initiative and they're willing to take that step, they're willing to, put themselves out of their comfort zone and make a decision that turns out to be the wrong decision, but they did it with good intention. And it's not something that's so blatant, so harmful that, you got to be willing to stand up for that officer, to those above you. You've got to be willing to take that heat sometimes. If you use, and it was one of my passages in Anthony's book, and I'm so glad and so thankful that it's in there, that if you use disciplinary as a first choice all the time, you're never going to gain any traction. You're never going to gain any respect. You just got to learn that, the accountability process is there, but how you use it is beneficial. If you use it on an employee who has good intentions, it shows initiative, and, there was no harm, no maliciousness in why they made that decision, stand up for them. There's been times where I've had to send people to formal disciplinary, but I'll be the first one to go up front and tell that warden, hey, look, boss, this is a damn good employee that made, a bad mistake, but had good intentions. And I really don't want to ruin that. And I don't want to ruin their eagerness and their initiative. And that's exactly what you do. But you got to be willing not only to let your employees put themselves out there, but you got to put yourself out there for them.
Yep. And by the way, wait, guys, if you have the book, it's chapter 84. It's formal discipline should never be the first option. And right above the passage, Joe Pomponio states a true leader should be able to right small wrongs by training, discussion, and solid leadership, and never with the use of formal disciplinary as a first option. Hey, I want to mention something before we go to a close, but Joe, that was spot on. Even with me, I look at everything from a constructive position. I mean, I'm looking at two things when it comes to me being management. One thing is the person, if we have a concern, let's say we have a decision that on good intent, based on the consequences, still wind up being a bad decision. Because unfortunately, we judge people on the outcome and not so much the reason behind it. But our job at that point is to discover the reason behind it and then make sure that we still trust that the person could do their job. So I look at two things that goes beyond the outcome. One, are they competent? And maybe there's just a bad thing that we can get some retraining on, and that's where the constructive approach is. And the other thing is a little bit tougher. It's, or do they have integrity, or can I trust them? So having said that, if I start to see a weak link in the chain, and I start seeing the supervisor pushing the blame, I'm going to wind up actually having to step back at that point and possibly issuing an investigation, because now I really don't know what's going on. And I tend to, when you're at management, guys, you do want to talk to your officers, but you do want to travel the dialogue down first, go through the chain of command. And if there's any hiccup along the way, and let's say something did happen, you got to be careful how far down you go, because you could jeopardize the investigation. So if there tends to be a hiccup in which I feel I don't have solid ground to go any further, I may have to issue an investigation and then look at everything when the investigation's handed back, and then make a decision. But now when I look at the investigation, I'm trying to read it from bottom up. So if you see what I'm saying now. So now if I feel that, no, maybe the officers weren't at fault, or maybe the intent was a good intent, then what happens is I look to make all things constructive. But then I think it's time that we have a sit down with that supervisor, who technically should have been able to explain that to me instead of me doing an investigation. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just saying what it is. I mean, we all have, management's an appointed position. We have to do our best to alleviate liability. If at any point I'm asking questions and there's a hiccup in which way I can go forward because I don't have solid ground to defend, and maybe it's because we have a supervisor who's in CYA blaming everyone, I have to issue the investigation. That as it comes back around and I know, these officers make total sense, or the staff member makes total sense, why wasn't the supervisor telling me that when I spoke to them? I'm going to do what I can to right what I could by those officers, let them know what happened, gently, without causing a divide, tell them why I had to do what I had to do without throwing anybody out there. But I am going to have a discussion with that supervisor, and I'm going to say, can I ask you a question? Why did you not, at this point, defend your people? Because I get the action was bad, all right, whatever, but their intent was on point. It was a novel situation, and they made a decision. Again, liability 100% on the back end of an action, never on the back end of someone stepping up and making a decision. There could be a concern, but it's never automatic liability. I could work with people that make decisions. I could cultivate that. I that's something that, you want people to do. But now I got a leader who, instead of sticking up for his people for making the right decision, regardless of the consequence, let me at least explain what happened and why this happened. This person was like, yo, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and I'll sit back and I'll just wait. No, I'm going to address that, because that's not a leader that I want on my front line. I'm going to be honest with you, because they're not doing enough for me to give me solid ground, which now forces the littlest of things to be investigated. So I mean, just people that may not have that perspective. Sometimes if you have a good, solid argument, we could work together and solve an issue. But sometimes if there's just a little bit of weakness in that argument, management, who is in control of liability, has to cover every possible exit. Let's just do it that way. Every possible exit in which they cannot control, they have to cover that, which may include, I'm going to need an objective agency to now get involved and have this investigation and then have it cut back to me. And it sucks when you get this investigation back, and at the end of the day, it's like, I didn't have to do this. If the damn supervisor would have stepped up and said, you know what? Yeah, we made this choice, but let me explain why, because then I could stand by and defend you. Even if it's again, a bad decision, why did you do it? That's all I need. Give me the why. Give me the why, because guess what? It does it. I'm looking for, can I trust your integrity? Now that's the big thing. Competency we could work on. So at this point here, all you had to do was give me that intent, and we could work together. But the moment you start blaming people, it becomes too confusing for me. And now I have to issue it out. Because at the end of the day, it can all go backwards. And I need us all be on the same page. And again, that's an effort to do what is right, not just for the people that are involved, but was ultimately right for the agency. It's not an effort to cover up. It's an effort to let people know that, yes, we are going to make mistakes. And like Joe said, it shouldn't be quick to the pen, because all you're going to do is stop people from making decisions. So again, if you're a supervisor and you just quick to blame everyone else, you're going to have an indecisive force, and you're going to be on an island by yourself. Right, Joe? Would you agree with that? You're in the investigation process. I mean, at one point there's a little hiccup, but then if you find out, like, yo, why didn't the supervisor even say that? Oh, because they were in survival mode. Call that guy back in, because I'm going to tell him that's not something that we're going to default to. I'm going to let him know what it takes to be a leader, because that's about that main question. Are you willing to take responsibility and accountability for your people? And all of a sudden, the first time shit happens, you do this shit. We did this whole investigation, and it takes an investigation to discover the why behind what the staff did. When I called that supervisor in, I asked you, and you went into survival. I'm sure you dealt with it, Joe, right, Joe?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right, Joe? I mean,
it's happened. It's happened. If you're the type of supervisor that goes into survival mode and starts chunking your own folks underneath the bus, it's not a problem from below you up. It's a you problem to those below you. That just shows that you're not involved with your staff. It shows that you're not being an effective leader. It shows that you're not training your staff. You're just letting them go, and you're praying to God that they keep it between the ditches every day. It's not what being a supervisor is about. You got to get out there and get involved in them people. Like I said, people are going to make mistakes. I mean, I've made plenty of mistakes, but the majority of them are with good intent, and you don't want to ruin that. You do not want to ruin that, because if your first choice is to throw somebody under the bus and let them go through the formal disciplinary process without even offering any kind of inside information as to why, saying, look, he messed up, but he had good intent. 9 times out of 10, that's going to be handled at an informal level, because, those above you are already thinking that this officer screwed up with bad intent, and, from the get-go, when that wasn't the case. And they go through the formal disciplinary process. They want to get in probation, or they get demoted, or they get suspended. And, one little explanation from you saying that, they made a bad choice with good intentions could have saved all of that. Now you've hampered the morale of your shift. You've hampered the morale of that person. And you've basically just shown the leadership that you have no capability and no testicular fortitude to stand up for your staff. And that's not what we're looking for. You have to be willing to stand up for your staff, or else they're not going to stand up for you.
Yeah, I think when you review an event, instead of focusing on the outcome, which tends to be where everybody's going to look, because that's where the biggest liability is, you need people who are going to say, okay, why was this choice made? And they don't always ask that. They look at the outcome. They don't care why it was made. And it just strictly becomes a witch hunt. But then when you do the investigation, hopefully the investigators are trying to get an understanding of what happened, and they're asking why. And then when you go back and read the details of the investigation, you take those whys into account. But it would be a lot easier if some of those whys were expressed when management needs it, or even immediately when something happens. I mean, I've seen really good supervisors that go through, a major incident, they do their reports, but then they're sending a separate email out to the higher level chain of command and just basically saying, I just want to explain what happened. I didn't put this all in the report, but let me explain what happened and where I feel like things could have went a little bit better. Because now a good thing about that is then the person that reads it already has some insight when they're reading the reports, and it gives them a little bit of a slight perspective or a bit of influence as they're reading it. Because remember, if we're looking at the consequences and all we hear is what happened, we're reading that report with this catastrophic bias. Literally the bias when we find out that something went wrong and we read the report based on this action, it affects what we're looking at. But if someone comes out and sends us something that says, hey, can I explain why? If I'm reading the event and I know why it happened, it does give me a little bit of a way to relate to it now, because I'm seeing it from a totally different perspective. I'm seeing it with that, why did they do it? Okay, they did this. Okay, so would that make sense to do that, regardless of the outcome, regardless of what just happened? Is that a good decision? It could be, or it makes sense. Now, granted, we had this. It's a shame that shit hit the fan, but the decision itself wasn't the worst decision in the world. It just wasn't the best. And in corrections, I'll be honest with you, we're not always going to be able to be in a position to make the best decision because we have limited knowledge of what we're facing at times. So having said that, key is to keep the decision motivated, keep people making the decisions, but understanding that, they're also making that decision with very limited information. And as a supervisor, that's a great thing to express when you go to defend your people. Be mindful when you're reading this report. These are the things that we did not have at our availability when making this decision, or whatever it was that happened. That's a whole great dialogue. I'm sure we've covered it before. Hey, Joe, you have anything you'd like to say in closing, you sexy thing?
Yeah. Don't, for those of y'all that view this video, don't let it dissuade you from not putting in for a supervisory position. Just go into the position knowing that, they're wanting to, they don't want a Superman. They want to know if they're going to get an individual who is willing to learn, who is eager to learn, who is willing to stand up for their people when needed, and still be able to lead them every day. Sergeants are just as dependable trainers as lieutenants are, and sometimes even more so, because the sergeants are supposed to be more involved with the staff below them. You're the face out there every day. But understand that there's going to be, being a sergeant is probably one of the most influential, probably one of the most important steps you'll ever take in your career path. Once you make sergeant, things tend to get a little bit easier because of the fact that you already have the supervisory experience and you're willing to learn, and you're already taking on jobs, above you and below you. So, just make sure that you're a well-rounded individual that, doesn't step into it and let the rank go to your head and become a micromanaging, totalitarian. Let yourself be open with your failures to your staff, because if you're willing to put yourself out there to your people are willing to put themselves out there to you. Don't try to control everything. There are some things that you can't control, and the things that you can't control, don't let it worry you to death. Worry about things that are totally within your control. But the main thing is be there for your people and know that you're there for your people, and make sure your people understand that you're there for them.
I'm gonna read. Joe has another quote in my book. It's in chapter 124, Leadership by Walking Around. It's right before the passage. And Joe says, leadership by walking around is one of the true fundamentals that allow you to be visible, connect with your staff, and provide you with the opportunity to teach. Add that to a tip. Don't be a supervisor that hangs out in your office. Go interact, and don't be so overwhelmed with the tedious work, the stuff that's urgent, that you sacrifice the important. And what is the important? Knowing your people.
Absolutely.
All because someone puts a time frame on something doesn't make it important. Just makes it superficially urgent.
Absolutely.
And guys, in my closing thought, guys, I thought this was great tips I wish I had looking back. Again, it's never going to be a catch-all. So hopefully you can apply this in your success as you transition to a supervisor, on top of the other knowledge you have gained. And we have also tons of videos on this topic. But we're gonna have Joe on again, maybe in a couple of days. Maybe we'll figure it out. Maybe Saturday or Sunday night, and we'll do something about crossing into lieutenant, which is a lot different because now you're crossing into the administrative role. So we'll definitely be talking about the accountability side of it all. Maybe having to write up people that you formerly were peers. Because that administrative role is that lieutenant is definitely a role that is it's a tough role. In my mind, that's the toughest transition is always going to be that first line jump. And yes, the sergeants are the harder workers, 100%. I think they're the hardest workers. But the lieutenants, sometimes they're involved in those decisions for those write-ups, or they have to carry out the write-ups. So again, and when they do the carry out the write-ups, let's say I'm a lieutenant, I'm buddies with Joe, but I've been told to do this investigation. That investigation has to be an honest investigation. So, I think that could also make the position a bit tough. And we'll have some fun with that discussion. And we'll come up with 5 tips and talk about your first step onto the administrative end. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe. Oh, there it is. Two? You have 2? Is that 2?
Yeah.
That was 2?
That's 2.
Let me see both at the same time, Joe.
I got the other one out in the living room.
Oh, what did you get 2? You got because you're your boss.
I'm getting one for my boss. Yeah.
If you want me to sign any of them, let me know.
Okay.
Yeah, just let me know, and I'll just
what I may do is mail you one if you want to mail me one with your autograph in it.
I don't care. And then what we could do also is when you give it to your boss, autograph your parts.
Yeah.
So she Absolutely. Has you're published now. Oh, I'm still recording. All right, Joe. See you later, man.
Later, dude.
Later, brother.